All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful way of looking at the U.S. Constitution. It's an interpretation that sees the document not just as a dusty old set of laws, but as something much more active, a carefully constructed fence. We're going to explore exactly what that means.
This quote right here, this is the key to the whole framework we're exploring today. The central idea is that every single part of the Constitution has one job, to act as a piece of a fence. And that fence has a single purpose, to keep government contained so that individual liberty has room to grow. So let's trace the lines of this fence piece by piece.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll dig into the fence metaphor itself. Then, we'll walk through the big three: Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary, seeing how each is fenced in. After that, we'll look at the principles that hold the whole union together and wrap up with the big takeaway.
So why a fence in the first place? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, this whole viewpoint starts with a core belief about power, that government, because it's run by imperfect people, always wants to expand its reach. And according to this interpretation, without some serious checks, that natural creep can eventually lead to tyranny.
And that's where the Constitution comes in. It's presented as the solution to that problem, a structure built specifically to contain that impulse. This fence is meant to keep government squarely within its designated boundaries, so that individual freedom has the space to flourish on the other side.
So let's start with the first part of this fence, Article I, which creates Congress. Right off the bat, Section 1 is absolutely crucial. It says that all legislative powers, that's the power to make laws, belong to Congress. This interpretation sees that as a very deliberate choice to make sure that the immense power of lawmaking isn't just handed over to one person or a handful of unelected judges.
And you can see this design really clearly in the two chambers. You have the House, with its frequent elections, acting as the direct voice of the people. They also hold the critical power of the purse. Then you have the Senate, which was originally meant to be a check on that, defending the sovereignty of the states and taking a longer-term view. It's a system of push and pull, designed to spread power out, not let it pile up in one place.
So how does a law actually get made? Well, Article 1, Section 7 sets up what this interpretation calls a constitutional speed bump. A bill has to pass both chambers, and then it has to get the president's signature. Now, this isn't meant to be inefficient. It's what you call intentional friction. It's designed to slow things down, to force debate, and to prevent bad, hasty laws from getting rushed through.
But what can Congress even make laws about? Article 1, Section 8 gives a very specific, limited to-do list called the enumerated powers. Think of it like this. The federal government can handle things like national defense, coining money, and regulating commerce between the states. But in this view, if a power, say education or healthcare, isn't on that specific list, well then it's a job for the states, or for the people themselves.
Now, you might be thinking, what about the necessary and proper clause? Sounds like a giant loophole, right? Well, this interpretation sees it very differently. It's not a license to invent new powers. Instead, it's just a housekeeping tool. It gives Congress the tools it needs to do the jobs it already has on its list, and that's it. Okay, next up is Article 2, which lays out the presidency. If Article 1 was about carefully granting the power to make laws, then Article 2 is all about carefully limiting the power to enforce those laws. This quote just nails the theme here. The source argues the founders were really worried about unchecked ambition, so they designed the presidency with some pretty firm guardrails to make sure the executive would be there to carry out the laws the Congress passed, not to just make up their own.
And you can see these guardrails everywhere. Yeah, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, but only Congress can actually declare war. The president can appoint judges, but only if the Senate says okay. For every bit of executive power that's granted, there's a check on it from another branch.
So what's the president's main job, according to this view? It all comes down to the take care clause. His duty is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This is seen not as a source of new power, but as a direct command for obedience. The president's job is to administer the law just as it's written, not to invent new rules out of thin air.
And what happens if a president just ignores these limits and abuses their power? Well, that's what impeachment is for. In this framework, it's the ultimate safety valve. It's not viewed as a political weapon, but as a serious process for moral accountability, a last resort to remove a leader who has fundamentally broken their oath.
All right, that brings us to the judicial branch in Article 3. So Congress makes the law, the president executes the law. What's left for the courts to do?
This quote perfectly sets the stage. According to this view, the judiciary was built to be a shield. Its purpose is to protect justice by applying the law as it's written, impartially, not to act like some kind of wizard waving a wand and transforming society based on their own personal beliefs.
The core idea here is really simple. Judges are supposed to be like umpires, not players in the game. Their role is to call balls and strikes based on the rulebook, which is the Constitution. They're not supposed to jump in and start pitching or trying to score runs. This means their jurisdiction is narrow, limited to actual cases, and they aren't supposed to be national policymakers.
So, we've covered the three main branches. Now let's look at the final articles. You can think of these as the operating system for the entire Union, laying out the rules for how the states and the federal government are supposed to work together.
Article 4 is all about the states acting as partners. It has the full faith and credit clause, which basically means states have to respect each other's laws and records. And, crucially, it guarantees every state a republican form of government, which is a safeguard to protect the whole system of federalism.
Next up is Article V, the amendment process. And the key thing to know here is that it's supposed to be difficult. You need a huge majority in Congress and then 3/4 of the states to agree. That's on purpose. It forces a massive consensus, ensuring the Constitution isn't just changed on a whim because of some temporary political fad. Article 6 has the famous supremacy clause. We've all heard it. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. But our source points out a critical little phrase in there. This only applies to laws made in pursuance thereof. That means if a law goes beyond the powers listed in the Constitution, it's not supreme at all. It has to follow the rules of the Charter to have any real authority.
And finally, we have Article 7, ratification. By demanding that 9 of the 13 states approve it, the Constitution itself showed where its power comes from. It doesn't come down from a king or a government. Nope. It flows up from the consent of the people acting through their states. So we've walked the entire perimeter of this constitutional fence. What's the final takeaway from this whole interpretation? What is that last line of defense for liberty? According to this view, the answer is the Bill of Rights. If the Articles built the fence, then the first 10 amendments are the final, ultimate shield. They carve our most essential liberties into stone and act as a final, unmistakable message to the government, this far and no farther. And this brings us to our final thought. We've just explored a view of the Constitution as a fixed charter, a fence built on timeless principles. So how does this idea of a fixed fence stack up against the view of a living document that should adapt and change with the times? Thinking about that question really gets to the very heart of the biggest constitutional debates we are having today.